The hospital waiting room was filled with anxious fathers-to-be, pacing the floor, checking their watches, and making small talk to pass the time. I sat quietly, lost in thought, when the nurse walked in with a bright smile and looked at the man beside me. "Congratulations, sir. You're the proud father of twins," she announced. The man's eyes widened, and then he let out a chuckle. "Well, would you look at that? I work for the Double Mint Chewing Gum Company. Guess that makes sense, huh?" He grinned, gave me a wink, and followed the nurse down the hall to meet his new family. About an hour later, the same nurse returned, this time turning to another man across the room. "Mr. Smith, congratulations. Your wife just delivered triplets." Mr. Smith shot up from his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. "Triplets? Well, how do you like that? I work for the 3M Company." He laughed, scratching his head, and made his way toward the maternity ward. Just then, I noticed the guy sitting next to me suddenly stand up, looking pale. He grabbed his coat and muttered, "I need some air. A lot of air." Curious, I asked, "Everything all right?" He nodded quickly, his face now a shade lighter than hospital walls. Yeah, it's just, I work for 7UP. One afternoon, Mark and his friend Jake met for lunch at their usual spot. As they settled in, Mark enthusiastically launched into a lecture about his latest obsession, healthy eating. "You know, Jake," he said, adjusting his napkin, "I've been studying nutrition, and it's fascinating how food affects your body. After all, you are what you eat." Jake smirked but said nothing as he eyed Mark's meal, a crisp salad with light vinaigrette and a small cup of unsweetened green tea. In contrast, Jake had opted for a fried chicken sandwich, a generous serving of fries, and a large Coke. As Mark prepared to dig in, he suddenly realized he had forgotten a fork. "Be right back," he said, rising from the table. Jake watched him walk away and couldn't resist the urge to mess with his health-conscious friend. Spotting his extra salt packet, he quickly dumped a generous amount into Mark's tea, stirring just enough to dissolve it. Then he leaned back and waited. Mark returned, picked up his tea, and took a confident sip. The reaction was instant. His face twisted in horror as he gagged and spat the tea back into the cup. "What the hell did you do to my tea?" he spluttered, eyes darting to Jake, who was barely containing his laughter. Jake leaned forward, grinning. "Didn't you just say, you are what you eat?" Mark glared at him, still trying to rid his mouth of the overwhelming saltiness. "Well, buddy," Jake continued with a smirk, "looks like this little prank just made you a little salt tea." In a quiet village, on the edge of a vast and beautiful forest, there lived an old man who had spent his entire life surrounded by towering trees. He had watched the seasons change, listened to the whispers of the wind through the leaves, and taken comfort in the shade of the forest that had been there longer than anyone could remember. But as the years passed, the old man noticed something else changing, his own reflection. His once thick hair had begun to thin, slowly but surely, until one day, as he lay on his deathbed, he was completely bald. Gathering his children around him, he spoke in a soft yet steady voice. "Look at me," he said, running a frail hand over his smooth head. "Once I had a magnificent head of hair, but now every strand is gone. My hair cannot be saved." He paused, then gestured toward the window where the forest stretched endlessly beyond their home. "But look outside. That forest, it is strong and full of life. Yet one day, if no one cares for it, the trees will vanish, just as my hair has, and this land will be as bare as my scalp." His children listened intently as he continued. "This is my final wish. Every time a tree falls, whether by nature or man, plant another in its place. Teach your children to do the same, and their children after them. Let this be our family's duty, to keep the forest alive, always." The old man took a final breath, his eyes resting on the trees one last time before closing forever. His children honored his wish. With every tree that fell, they planted another. As the years turned to decades and the decades to centuries, each generation passed down the responsibility, ensuring that the forest remained as lush and vibrant as it had always been. And so, because of one man's foresight and his family's dedication, the great forest never went bald. After all, it was all thanks to his receding airline. Jacob sat slumped against the wall in the school hallway, staring at the ceiling, utterly bored. He had finished his work early, and now he was just waiting for the next class to start. That's when his teacher walked by. "Hey, miss, I've got a question for you," Jacob said, sitting up with a mischievous grin. The teacher, always up for a bit of fun, stopped and raised an eyebrow. "All right, Jacob, let's hear it." "How do you put an elephant in the fridge?" She chuckled. "I have no idea how." Jacob grinned. "Easy. You open the door and put it in there." The teacher rolled her eyes but smiled. "Okay, I walked right into that one." Wait, Jacob continued. "How do you put a giraffe in the fridge?" The teacher smirked. "Ha, I got this one. You open the door and put it in there." Jacob shook his head. "Nope. First, you have to take the elephant out." The teacher laughed. All right, you got me again." But Jacob wasn't done yet. "Next question. All the animals went to the tiger's birthday party, except one. Which one was it?" The teacher thought for a moment. The tiger?" "Nope." Jacob grinned. "The giraffe, because it's still in the fridge." The teacher burst out laughing, shaking her head. "Okay, you're on a roll. One more, and then I have to get to class." Jacob leaned forward. "All right, final question. There's a river full of crocodiles. You need to cross it. How do you do it?" The teacher thought hard. I guess I'd find a bridge." Jacob smirked. "Nope. You just swim across, because all the crocodiles are at the tiger's birthday party." One quiet morning at the town library, a chicken strutted through the front doors, hopped up onto the desk, and looked the librarian square in the eye. "Book, book, book!" The chicken clucked. The librarian, taken aback but amused, handed over a couple of novels. The chicken took them in its beak, turned, and waddled out the door. Curious, the librarian watched as it crossed the street, trekked through a field, and disappeared over the hill. The next day, the chicken was back. It marched up to the desk, dropped the borrowed books in front of the librarian, and clucked, "Book, book, book, book." Raising an eyebrow, the librarian handed over 4 books this time, watching even more closely as the chicken carried them away along the same mysterious path. By the 3rd day, the librarian could no longer resist. Once again, the chicken returned, dropped the latest books on the desk, and squawked, "Book, book, book, book!" Determined to solve the mystery, the librarian silently followed as the chicken exited the library. Across the street, through the field, and down the hill they went, until they reached a small pond. There, perched on a rock at the water's edge, sat the biggest frog the librarian had ever seen. The chicken waddled up, carefully placed the books in front of the frog, and clucked, "Book, book, book." The frog studied the pile, flipped through a few pages with its front leg, and then gave a slow, knowing nod. "Read it, read it, read it," the frog croaked. It was a busy afternoon at a crowded city bus stop, and among the waiting passengers stood a striking young woman dressed in head-to-toe leather, a tight mini-skirt matching leather jacket and knee-high boots. She exuded confidence, catching the attention of more than a few onlookers. As the bus finally arrived, she stepped forward to board, but there was a problem. Her skirt was so tight that she couldn't lift her leg high enough to reach the first step. Flashing an apologetic smile at the bus driver, she discreetly reached behind and unzipped her skirt a little, hoping for some extra movement. With renewed confidence, she tried again. No luck. Feeling slightly flustered, she unzipped the skirt a little more and gave it another go. Still, her leg wouldn't budge high enough. Now growing visibly embarrassed, she gave a nervous chuckle, reached back and loosened the zipper one last time, convinced that this would finally do the trick. But once again, nothing. Before she could attempt another adjustment, she suddenly felt a pair of strong hands lift her effortlessly off the ground. In one smooth motion, she was placed gently onto the bus step. Shocked, she spun around to face the culprit, a towering Texan in a cowboy hat, standing behind her in line, her face turned red with outrage. "How dare you touch me? I don't even know who you are!" She snapped. The Texan tipped his hat and, in a slow drawl, replied, "Well, ma'am, normally I'd agree with you, but after you unzipped my fly 3 times, I kind of figured we was friends." One afternoon, a woman grew frustrated with the strange creaking sound coming from her closet every time a bus passed by on the street outside. No matter how many times she checked, she couldn't figure out what was causing it. Determined to fix the problem, she called a carpenter to take a look. The carpenter arrived, inspected the closet, and at first found nothing unusual. But just as he was about to leave, a bus rumbled down the street, and like clockwork, the closet let out a loud, eerie creak. The carpenter frowned, scratching his head. "That's strange. I don't see anything wrong. Maybe if I sit inside before the next bus comes, I'll catch what's making the noise." The woman nodded, appreciating his dedication, though feeling a little guilty for wasting his time. The carpenter stepped into the closet, closed the door behind him, and waited, carefully watching the wood for any sign of movement. A few minutes later, completely unaware of the situation, the woman's husband arrived home. Hearing his wife in the bathroom, he wandered into the bedroom, loosened his tie, and absent-mindedly opened the closet, only to come face to face with a man sitting inside. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The husband's eyes darkened with suspicion. His jaw clenched. He threw a quick glance toward the bathroom, then slowly turned his furious gaze back to the carpenter. "What the heck are you doing in my closet?" he growled. The carpenter, now sweating, swallowed hard. His mind raced for an explanation. Any explanation. Finally, he forced a nervous smile and said, "Would you believe me if I told you I'm waiting for the bus?" On a particularly blustery afternoon, a rabbi was walking along the street when a fierce gust of wind snatched his hat right off his head. He hurried after it, but the wind had other plans. It sent the hat tumbling farther and farther away. Just as the rabbi was about to give up, a young non-Jewish man witnessing the struggle sprinted after the hat. Dodging pedestrians and leaping over a park bench, he finally caught it and triumphantly returned it to the rabbi. Overcome with gratitude, the rabbi smiled warmly. "Young man, you have done a great mitzvah today. Here, take this." He handed the young man $20 and placed a hand on his shoulder. "May you be blessed with good fortune." The young man beamed, thanked the rabbi, and went on his way. Feeling lucky, he decided to take his newly acquired blessing straight to the racetrack. Upon arriving, he carefully studied the race program. In the 5th race, he spotted a horse named Top Hat running at odds of 100 to 1. "It's a sign," he thought. "The rabbi's hat, Top Hat. This must be fate." He bet the entire $20 on Top Hat, and to his amazement, the horse won. Flushed with excitement, he let his winnings ride on the next race. This time, he noticed a horse named Bowler running at 30 to 1. Another kind of hat. The rabbi's blessing is working, he thought. He placed all his money on Bowler and won again. Now riding high on confidence and a small fortune, he scanned the final race. The heavy favorite, a horse named Chateau. His mind clicked. "Chateau, that's hat in French. This is it. My biggest win yet." Without hesitation, he put everything on Chateau. Moments later, his dreams crumbled as Chateau finished dead last. Devastated, he returned home and recounted his wild day to his father. "I had it all, Dad. The rabbi's blessing, the perfect bets. But I lost everything in the last race." His father frowned. "Which horse did you bet on?" "Chateau. Since Chateau means hat in French, I figured he was a sure thing." His father groaned and shook his head. "You idiot, chapeau means hat in French, not chateau." The son sighed. Yeah, I know that now. But guess who actually won the race?" His father leaned in. "Who?" "A total long shot," the son muttered. "Some Spanish horse named Sombrero." Coach Simmons had seen a lot in his years of coaching football, but one thing puzzled him more than any play on the field. His star tackle, Bubba, always had a swarm of women around him. It didn't seem to matter where they were. After practice, at games, even during team meetings, Bubba was a magnet for the ladies. Finally, unable to contain his curiosity, the coach pulled Bubba aside one day. "Bubba, he said, lowering his voice. I gotta ask, how do you do it? You've got more women chasing you than I've got footballs in my office. What's your secret? Bubba grinned and leaned in conspiratorially. Well, Coach, it's simple. Whenever I'm about to be with a woman, I take it out and bang it on the dresser like a hammer. It numbs it up, and I can go all night. The coach stared at him wide-eyed. You're serious? Dead serious, Bubba said with a wink. That night, Coach Simmons got home earlier than usual. His wife was in the shower, and he saw an opportunity to put Bubba's secret trick to the test. He stripped down, stood next to the dresser, and just like Bubba described, began whacking away. Bang, bang, bang! Suddenly, his wife poked her head out of the shower, eyes wide with shock. Bubba, is that you? A man strolls into a talent agent's office, his loyal dog trotting beside him. The agent, looking disinterested, leans back in his chair and sighs. All right, make it quick. What's your talent? The man grins. Oh, it's not me, sir. It's my dog. He talks. The agent rolls his eyes. Yeah, sure he does. Look, buddy, I don't have time for jokes. Get out before I throw you out. Wait, I can prove it, the man insists. He turns to his dog and asks, what do you normally find on top of a house? The dog wags his tail and says, roof. The agent scowls. Really? That's the best you've got. Hold on, the man says. One more. He looks at the dog and asks, how does sandpaper feel? Rough? The dog barks enthusiastically. The agent shakes his head. Oh, for crying out loud, get out of my office. Wait, just one last question, the man pleads. He turns to the dog and asks, in your opinion, who was the greatest baseball player of all time? The dog barks, Ruth. The agent has had enough. That's it. Out. He shoves the man and the dog out onto the street, slamming the door behind them. The man sighs and shakes his head. The dog turns to him and says, geez, should I have said Joe DiMaggio? Jack came home from his golf game looking frustrated. His wife, noticing his mood, asked, how was your game, dear? Jack sighed. Well, I was hitting the ball pretty well, but my eyesight's gotten so bad I couldn't see where the ball went. His wife thought for a moment. Why don't you take my brother Scott with you next time? Jack frowned. Scott? But he's 85 years old and doesn't even play golf anymore. True, she admitted, but he's got perfect eyesight. He can watch where your ball goes. Figuring it was worth a shot, Jack took Scott along the next day. Stepping up to the tee, Jack took a mighty swing and sent the ball flying straight down the fairway. He turned eagerly to Scott. Did you see it? Jack asked. Yep. Scott nodded. Jack grinned. Well, where is it? Scott stared at him blankly. I forgot. Jack had always dreamed of skydiving. After weeks of hyping himself up, he finally booked a session and spent what felt like an eternity listening to the instructor drone on about safety procedures. By the time the plane took off, he was sure he could recite the entire manual in his sleep. At 10,000 feet, the instructor gave him the signal. Heart pounding with excitement, Jack leaped from the plane, feeling the rush of wind against his face. It was everything he had imagined. Until he pulled the ripcord. Nothing happened. Panic set in. He yanked the cord again. Still nothing. His excitement turned to terror as he reached for the backup chute and pulled. Nothing. Now he was plummeting toward the earth, frantically tugging at both cords like a man trying to start a rusty lawnmower. Just as he was about to accept his fate, he noticed something strange. A man was flying toward him, but in the wrong direction. This guy was rocketing up into the sky. As they passed each other, Jack shouted, Hey, do you know anything about skydiving? The other man, flailing wildly, yelled back, No, do you know anything about gas stoves? Harold lay in his bed, his frail fingers intertwined with his wife's. The steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the quiet hospital room, a reminder that his time was running out. His wife, Margaret, sat beside him, her eyes glistening with love and sorrow. Margaret, he whispered, his voice weak but urgent. There's one last thing I need to ask of you before I go. She squeezed his hand and nodded. Anything, my love. Just say the word. Harold took a slow, shaky breath. I want you to marry my old friend, Jacob. Margaret blinked in shock. Jacob, she repeated, unable to hide her surprise. But I thought you couldn't stand him. A faint smile crept across Harold's lips. He gazed at her with a twinkle in his tired eyes. and with his final bit of strength muttered, "That's precisely why." Edna and Mildred had been best friends for decades. They did everything together: bingo nights, afternoon teas, and, of course, their weekly drives around town in Mildred's old but reliable Cadillac. On one particularly sunny afternoon, the two ladies set off on their usual cruise. Mildred, gripping the oversized steering wheel, peered over the dashboard while Edna sat comfortably in the passenger seat, enjoying the ride. As they approached a major intersection, the light turned red. But Mildred didn't slow down. She drove straight through. Edna's eyes widened. She gripped the door handle but said nothing. Did we just run a red light? She thought. No, surely not. I must be seeing things. A few minutes later, they reached another major crossroads. Again, the light was red. Again, Mildred plowed right through. Edna's heart started pounding. That was definitely red, wasn't it? She began questioning her own mind. Maybe her eyesight was going. Maybe she was imagining things. Then a third red light approached. Mildred didn't even tap the brakes. That was it. "Mildred!" Edna cried, her hands shaking. "Did you know we just ran through 3 red lights in a row? You could have killed us both." Mildred blinked and turned to her friend, a look of utter confusion on her face. "Oh," she gasped, "am I driving?" A 70-year-old man goes into a fancy establishment. He picks out a young, pretty woman. They go up to her room, strip down, and climb into bed. The old man performs like a teenager. The woman is amazed at how energetic and agile he is. She tells him if he can do it like that again, she'll give him one for free. The old man grins and replies, "Yeah, I can, but I need to take a 20-minute nap, and while I'm asleep, I need you to hold my old package." She shrugs, holds onto it, and sure enough, after 20 minutes, he wakes up and goes at it again, just as passionately as before. Amazed, the woman repeats her offer. "That was incredible. If you do it one more time, I won't even charge you." The old man nods. "Deal, but same thing. I need a quick nap, and you have to hold on to it again." She agrees. He naps, wakes up 20 minutes later, and this time he's even more energetic than before. Finally, catching her breath, the woman can't contain her curiosity anymore. "I get why you need the nap, but why do you insist on me holding on to it?" The old man chuckles and says, "Oh, that's just so you don't steal my wallet." Stanley had been searching for the perfect desk for his office when he spotted an elegant antique wooden desk in a shop window. It had a timeless charm, and something about it just felt right. Excited, he stepped inside and approached the shopkeeper. "How much for that desk in the window?" he asked. "That fine piece is going for $5,000. The shopkeeper replied. Stanley nearly choked. $5,000? For an old desk? That's outrageous. The shopkeeper merely smiled. "Ah, but this isn't just any desk. It's a magic desk." Stanley raised an eyebrow. "Magic, huh?" To prove it, the shopkeeper turned to the desk and said, "Desk, how much money do I have in my pocket?" The desk immediately lifted one of its legs and tapped the floor 4 times. The shopkeeper pulled his pocket inside out, and sure enough, there were exactly $4 coins. Stanley's eyes widened. "Okay, that's impressive," he admitted. Then, with a smirk, he leaned in and asked, "All right, desk, how much money does my wife have in her bank account?" For a moment, the desk was silent. Then, suddenly, all 4 legs began pounding against the floor, thumping wildly, shaking the entire shop. The drawers rattled, the wood creaked, and for over 5 minutes, the desk practically danced in a frenzy of non-stop tapping. Stanley's jaw dropped. "What the heck? Where did she get all that from?" With a final, dramatic thud, the desk's legs buckled, its drawers flung open, and the entire desk collapsed in exhaustion. The shopkeeper crossed his arms and nodded. "So still think $5,000 is too much?" Jack Nicklaus, the legendary golfer, was unwinding at a bar when he found himself sharing a drink with none other than Stevie Wonder. They chatted casually, catching up on their careers. "So, how's the music business treating you?" Jack asked, swirling his drink. "Not too bad," Stevie said with a nod. "My latest album cracked the top 10, so I can't complain." "What about you? Still hitting them straight?" Jack chuckled. "I'm not winning as much as I used to, but I'm still in the game. My swing had been giving me trouble, but I think I've sorted it out now. Stevie nodded knowingly. You know, I've found that when my swing goes wrong, I just take a break, think about it, and when I get back, everything feels right again. Jack raised an eyebrow. Wait, you play golf? Of course, Stevie replied, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Jack blinked, his mind racing. But, Stevie, you're blind. How on earth do you play golf? Stevie grinned. No offense taken, Jack. It's a fair question. What I do is have my caddy stand in the middle of the fairway and call out to me. I listen for his voice and hit the ball toward him. When I reach my shot, he moves down the fairway and calls again. Simple, really. Jack was astonished. And putting? Same concept, Stevie explained. My caddy lays down with his head near the hole and calls to me. I just putt toward his voice. Jack shook his head in disbelief. That's incredible. What's your handicap? I play off scratch, Stevie said confidently. Jack nearly choked on his drink. Scratch! That's amazing. We have to play a round together sometime. Stevie leaned back and smirked. Well, I only play for money. People don't take me seriously otherwise. And I never play for less than $100,000 per hole. Jack hesitated for a moment, weighing the odds. He was up for the challenge. All right, he said, nodding. I'm in. When do you want to play? Stevie grinned. Any night next week works for me. Tom and Jerry had been best friends since childhood. Though life took them in different directions, Tom to the fast-paced streets of New York and Jerry to the political buzz of Washington, they made a pact. Every 10 years, they would meet in Florida for a round of golf and a long-overdue catch-up. In 32, their first reunion was full of energy and excitement. After an intense 18-hole game, Tom wiped his brow and asked, So, where do you want to go for lunch? Jerry grinned. Hooters? Tom chuckled. Why Hooters? Because they have those servers with the big boobs, tight shorts, and gorgeous legs. Tom laughed. You're on! Age 42. 10 years later, they met again. A little older, a little wiser, but still competitive on the green. So, where to for lunch? Tom asked. Hooters, Jerry said without hesitation. Tom raised an eyebrow. Again, why this time? They have cold beer, big screen TVs, and side action on the games. Tom nodded. Fair enough. Age 52. Another decade passed, and their golf skills had softened a bit, but their tradition remained strong. Where to for lunch? Tom asked. Hooters, Jerry replied. Tom smirked. Let me guess. The waitresses? Jerry shook his head. Nah, the food's actually pretty good, and plenty of parking. Tom laughed. Okay, good enough for me. Age 62. By now, their swings weren't quite as sharp, and their post-game routine included a few painkillers. Lunch? Tom asked, stretching his back. Jerry nodded. Hooters, Tom sighed. Why this time? Wings are half price, and the food isn't too spicy. Tom rubbed his stomach. Sold. Age 72. They moved a little slower, and their golf game included frequent stops to rest, but they still kept their tradition alive. Hooters, Jerry suggested. Tom chuckled. Dare I ask why? They have 6 handicapped parking spots right by the door, and senior discounts. Tom grinned. You always were a man of practicality. Age 82. Now their golf game was less about competition and more about making it to the end of the course. As they shuffled off the green, Tom asked, So, where to? Jerry thought for a moment, then brightened. Hooters. Tom looked puzzled. Why? Jerry smiled. Because we've never been there before. Tom nodded thoughtfully. Huh. Well, let's give it a try. And off they went, upholding their tradition, no matter how many times they forgot it. One afternoon, a man walked into a bustling car dealership, greeted by a smiling salesman eager to make a sale. Good afternoon, sir, the salesman said enthusiastically. Looking for something special today? Yeah, the man replied. I'm looking for a car for my wife. Excellent choice, the salesman said, leading him toward a sleek sedan. Now, this beauty is one of our quietest models. The ride is incredibly smooth and relaxing. The man shook his head. Nah, that won't do. My wife is definitely not the quiet and relaxing type. Undeterred, the salesman quickly guided him to a different car, a sporty coupe. Then perhaps this is more her style, quick, sleek, and agile, built for excitement. The man sighed. Nope, my wife is certainly not the sleek type. The salesman, now slightly flustered, thought for a moment before leading the man to a third car. With a confident smile, he said, Now, sir, this one has been incredibly popular. In fact, nearly every man who's come in has taken it for a test drive. Sold, the man interrupted.